The morning after my wife's memorial service, my son sat down at her kitchen table and started talking about the house like she'd already been gone for years. Not gone 3 days. 3 days. He had a yellow legal pad. He was writing things down. I stood in the doorway with my coffee and I watched him do it. His wife, my daughter-in-law, was leaning over his shoulder, pointing at something on the pad. Neither of them noticed me. Or maybe they noticed and didn't care. I'm still not sure which one hurts more. I went back to the bedroom. I closed the door quietly. I sat on Eleanor's side of the bed, her side, the left side, where she'd slept for 31 years, and I put my hand flat on the pillow and I just breathed for a while. The folder was in the nightstand drawer, right where she'd told me. Eleanor wasn't a complicated woman, but she was a thorough one. She taught second grade for 26 years, and she ran our household the same way she ran her classroom. Organized, calm, 3 steps ahead of every problem before it became one. When the doctor told us the cancer had come back, and that this time it had come back in a way that wasn't going anywhere, Eleanor didn't cry in the office. She waited until we got to the car. She cried for maybe 4 minutes. Then she dried her face and said, "All right, I need to make some calls." Over the next 8 months, while she was doing chemo, while she was losing her hair and then getting it back and then losing it again, Eleanor made calls. She met with our attorney, a quiet man named Aldred who'd handled our affairs for 15 years, without me, twice. She opened an account I didn't know about. She drafted documents I didn't see until after she was gone. She updated her will without telling me what she'd changed. I knew she was doing something. She would get a look sometimes when she thought I wasn't watching, a look like she was checking items off a list in her head. I asked her once what she was planning, and she said, "I'm planning for you to be okay." And that was the end of that conversation. What I didn't know, what I had no idea about, was the cabin. We'd owned it for 11 years. A small place up in the hill country, 3 hours from our house in San Marcos. Eleanor had inherited it from her aunt when her aunt passed. It wasn't fancy. 2 bedrooms, a screened porch, a creak you could hear from the kitchen window. We'd go up there every October, just the 2 of us, and we'd drink coffee on the porch and read and not talk much, and that was enough. I didn't know she'd transferred the deed into a trust with Aldred as the trustee and my name as the sole beneficiary, and a provision that it couldn't be touched, sold, or encumbered by anyone, for any reason, without a process that would take years and cost more in legal fees than the property was worth to fight over. She'd done all of that quietly, while she was sick, while she was tired all the time and her hands shook, and she still got up every morning and made the bed, because she said she needed one thing in her life that looked finished. I found out about the trust the same night I found the folder, 3 days after the memorial, sitting on Eleanor's side of the bed with my hand on her pillow. The folder had a note clipped to the front in her handwriting. It said, "Wait. Be patient. Let it unfold. I love you. I've taken care of it." I read that note 4 times before I put it down. Then I called Aldred. My son is 41 years old. His name is Barrett. He's a project manager for a construction company, and he is, and I say this with full awareness that I am his father, the kind of man who believes that being organized is the same thing as being right. He makes spreadsheets for family vacations. He sends follow-up emails after phone calls. He has a binder for his vehicle maintenance records. I used to think this was admirable. Eleanor used to tease me for bragging about it to other people. What I understand now that I didn't understand before is that there's a difference between a person who's organized because they want things to go well and a person who's organized because they want to be in control. I don't think Barrett is a bad man. I think somewhere along the way, maybe without even noticing, he became the second kind. His wife, I'll call her my daughter-in-law and leave it at that, because she is a person I am trying very hard to be fair to, is the one who sharpened him. She's smart and she's capable, and she manages their money the way Barrett manages his binder, which is to say obsessively and with complete confidence that she knows best. The 2 of them together can make you feel, in a very short amount of time, like you are a problem to be solved. I had felt that way around them for a few years, if I'm honest. Even before Eleanor got sick. But Eleanor was always there to smooth things over, to redirect conversations, to give me a look that meant let it go, we'll talk about it later. She was the buffer between me and the sharpest edges of my son's organizational instincts. After she was gone, there was no buffer. Within 2 weeks of the memorial, My son had sent me 3 separate emails, not phone calls, outlining his thoughts on next steps. The subject lines were things like estate timeline and financial planning discussion and property assessment. Importance of acting soon. He'd consulted a realtor. He'd gotten a preliminary number on the San Marcos house. He'd noted, helpfully, that the market was favorable right now, and that waiting would likely cost me money. He had not asked me how I was sleeping. My daughter-in-law called once in the 3rd week and asked if I'd thought about what I wanted to do long-term. When I said I hadn't, not really, she said she understood, but that it was important not to let grief cloud practical decision-making. I held the phone very still and looked out the kitchen window at Eleanor's garden, which was starting to go brown at the edges because I hadn't watered it, and I said, "You're right. I'll think about it." I didn't say anything else. I'd already talked to Aldred by then. I knew what Eleanor had done. I just needed to decide when to let it unfold, the way she'd asked me to. I decided I'd know when the time came. The time came on a Sunday in November. Barrett and my daughter-in-law drove down from Austin. They'd moved there the year before, 45 minutes from San Marcos. And they brought lunch, which I appreciated, and they set it out on the table, and we ate together, and it was almost normal for a while. Then Barrett got out his legal pad. He walked me through it like a presentation. The estimated value of the house, the cost of upkeep on a single income. Your income, he was careful to say, as if I didn't know what my income was. Property taxes, maintenance, the yard. His voice was measured and reasonable. His daughter-in-law sat with her hands folded on the table, nodding at the right intervals. He said that downsizing made sense. He said that a smaller place, a condo, maybe, or a retirement community, would free up capital. He said they'd looked into some options. He pulled out a second sheet with a list of communities. He'd already called 2 of them. He'd gotten pricing. "I'm not moving to a retirement community," I said. "Dad." His voice had that tone in it, the one that meant he was being patient with me. "We're just exploring options." "I don't need to explore those options." My daughter-in-law put her hand over mine. "We just want what's best for you," she said. "It's a lot of house for one person." I looked at her hand on mine. I looked at Barrett's legal pad. I thought about Eleanor sitting with Aldred without telling me, driving to appointments while I thought she was resting, building something solid and invisible around me like a fence I'd only see from the outside once it was done. I thought about what she'd written. "Wait. Be patient. Let it unfold." "You're right," I said. "It's something to think about." Barrett looked relieved. My daughter-in-law patted my hand and started clearing the lunch plates. I didn't say anything about the cabin. They came back in January. This time they had paperwork, an actual listing agreement, pre-drafted, that their realtor had prepared. They'd gone from exploring options to here's what to sign in 8 weeks. I sat at the table and I read every page. Barrett watched me read. He kept starting sentences and stopping them, which was unusual for him. Usually he speaks in complete paragraphs. My daughter-in-law got up and walked around the kitchen, straightening things, touching the counters, looking at the cabinets with an expression I'd seen before on people touring a house they were thinking about buying. After I finished reading, I set the papers down. "I need some time," I said. "The market timing." Barrett started. "I need some time," I said again, and something in my voice was quiet enough that he stopped. That night, after they'd driven back to Austin, I called my granddaughter. Her name is Lottie. She's 23, Barrett's daughter from a relationship he had before he met my daughter-in-law. She lives in Knoxville and works at a veterinary clinic, and she called Eleanor every Sunday until the end, and sat with her on video chat while Eleanor couldn't get out of bed anymore. Lottie is the one who drove down for the memorial and stayed for a week after, and she's the one who watered Eleanor's garden while I couldn't make myself do it. I told Lottie about the cabin. I told her about the trust. I told her what Eleanor had done. There was a long silence on the phone. Then Lottie said, "Grandma knew. She knew," I said. "So what are you going to do?" I looked out the kitchen window. It was dark and cold, and I could see Eleanor's garden in the backyard, the winter bare stalks of things she'd planted 3 years ago still standing in the raised beds waiting. "I'm going to sign the listing agreement," I said. I signed it in February. The house went under contract in 19 days. I didn't tell Barrett I'd already arranged the movers. I didn't tell him I'd been making trips to the cabin all winter, stocking it, fixing the screens on the porch, replacing the water heater, getting the property survey updated the way Aldred had recommended. I didn't tell him that I'd transferred the contents of Eleanor's secret account, the one she'd been building for 2 years without my knowing, into a joint account Aldred held on my behalf. I didn't tell him any of it. I set my coffee mug down, and I listened and I signed where he pointed, and I said, "Thank you," when his wife said they were relieved. I was being practical about this. The closing was on a Thursday. I had a moving truck scheduled for the following Monday. Barrett called me Saturday morning, excited. He said the buyers had asked about buying the furniture too. Would I be willing to negotiate? He said they'd made a strong offer on the dining table and the bedroom set. He said he thought we should consider it because moving furniture was expensive and it would simplify things. Sure, I said. Whatever simplifies things. I'd already moved everything I wanted to keep. The movers had taken it to a storage unit outside Kerrville, 8 miles from the cabin, 2 weeks earlier. I want to be fair about what I took. I left the big furniture, the dining table, the couches, the bedroom set, because those things belonged to the house more than to me, and because I'd never liked the dining table much anyway. I took Eleanor's rocking chair, which had been her mother's. I took the quilt from the guest room that her aunt had made. I took the kitchen things that had been ours for so long they had scratches in the handles from decades of use. I took her gardening gloves from the hook by the back door. I don't know why that was the last thing. I just couldn't leave them. Monday morning, the movers came for the remaining boxes and the few pieces of furniture I'd set aside. Barrett wasn't there. He'd gone back to Austin after the closing. My daughter-in-law had sent a text saying they were glad this was all coming together. I locked the door of that house for the last time at 2 in the afternoon. I stood on the porch for a minute. I thought about 31 years of mornings in that kitchen. I thought about Eleanor planting her garden the spring after we moved in, kneeling in the dirt in her good jeans because she couldn't find her old ones, laughing at herself. I thought about the way the light came through the living room windows in the late afternoon in October, that particular gold that only happens in Texas in the fall. Then I got in my truck and I drove to Kerrville. The cabin looks different in winter than it does in October. I hadn't known that before. We'd only ever come in October. The creek runs higher in winter, louder. The cedar trees hold their color all year. In the evenings, the sky goes a shade of pink I don't have a word for, and the whole hill settles into quiet the way a person settles into a chair they've been looking forward to all day. Lottie drove down the second weekend. She brought her dog, a big brown mutt named after a president, and the dog ran straight into the creek and then ran straight into the cabin, and I didn't even mind. We sat on the porch with coffee, and Lottie said, "How do you feel?" "Honest answer," I said. "Always." I thought about it. I watched the creek through the trees. I thought about Barrett's legal pad. I thought about Eleanor's folder. I thought about 31 years and a quilt from an aunt I never met, and gardening gloves on a hook. "I feel like your grandmother was smarter than me," I said, "and I always knew that, but I know it more now." Lottie laughed and leaned her head on my shoulder the way she used to when she was small, and the dog came out of the cabin and stood on the porch looking at both of us, with that benevolent certainty dogs have, like, everything is fine as long as everyone stays where they belong. Barrett called in March. He'd heard from the buyers. The dining table had a crack in the leaf he hadn't noticed, and they were asking for a concession. He wanted to know if I had the receipt for when we'd had it refinished. I didn't. He asked how I was settling in. I told him I was settling in fine. He asked for my address, and I gave him the P.O. box Aldred had set up in Kerrville. He didn't push for more than that, which surprised me. I think somewhere in him, in a place he probably doesn't look at very often, he knows that something happened that he doesn't fully understand yet. Maybe someday I'll explain it to him. Maybe someday he'll ask. I don't know what kind of man he'll need to become before he can hear it, before the answer would land somewhere useful instead of just making him angry. I'm not in a hurry. For the first time in a long time, I have the thing Eleanor was trying to give me all along. Time, quiet, a porch and a creek and a sky I don't have words for. She knew I would need it. She knew before I did the way she always did, and she built it quietly and left me the key. I keep it on the hook by the back door, right next to her gardening gloves. I see it every morning when I make coffee, and every evening when I lock up for the night, and every time I see it I think, she was 3 steps ahead of the problem before it became one. right up until the very end. And I think, I'm okay. I'm okay.